Hi, welcome students to week 6 of this semester. And before we get going, I wanted to give you a reminder or a heads up that there is a reading assignment that's been posted in the lecture module. The article is entitled, "What is Nutrition and Why Does It Matter?" It's a really good overview. What's talked about in the article will be subject matter that we'll be talking about in the next week to 2 weeks. So do be sure and read that. Today, our presentation is going to be on the MyPlate Guidelines. And so that is what is coming up. I did want to check in with you to see how your project was going. Hopefully, all is going well. And I wanted to perhaps provide some rationale for some of what I'm having you do in this project. What you see right now is what is considered the typical American diet. And, I don't know if you consume what's considered the typical American diet, but in general, this is what the average American does. And in your project, what I've tried to do is draw attention to some of these areas so you can check out, um, do I actually do these things? Let's just look at this. The typical American diet is too high in these 5 items: too high in sodium, too high in total fat, too high in saturated fat. Saturated fat sometimes gets called the bad fat. Too high in number 4 is sugar, and number 5, too high in calories. And what I have listed over on the right is just one health condition that is sometimes related um, to the way that we eat. Um, and more specifically, for example, if I consistently eat a diet that's too high in sodium, that's going to increase my risk for high blood pressure. Okay. And on down, what you're seeing is the connection to a diet that's consistently too high in total fat, um, high calorie. It's going to end up being a high calorie diet if you're consuming a lot of total fat, and consuming a high number of calories can increase risk of obesity or overweightedness. Diets too high in saturated fat, again, sometimes gets called the bad fat, increases risk of heart disease. Number 4, diets too high in sugar. If you consistently do that, it can increase your risk for diabetes. And then diets too high in calories. Once again, we're looking at increased risk of overweightedness or obesity. So, what I'm trying to do with that project is point you so that you can check in, especially with some of these categories, and see how you're doing. I've also asked you a question in your project about your consumption of fiber for just that one day. How did you do? And the typical US diet or the typical American diet tends to be too low in fiber. And diets that are consistently low in fiber, well, they increase your risk of constipation, certain types of cancer, for example, colon cancer, and something called diverticulitis. So, this is something that I want you to really take in. I sometimes think of food as medicine. How we eat can definitely impact our physical and emotional well-being, and more to come later on that. So here we go. I don't know how many of you may be familiar with what are called the MyPlate Guidelines. The MyPlate Guidelines are issued by the USDA, that's the United States Department of Agriculture. And we used to have a pyramid. It used to be called My Pyramid. And this there was this transition to this concept of My Plate some years back. And I kind of like it because it's a very visual representation of how we're supposed to be eating. And in a perfect world, when I sit down to eat, this is what my plate should at least resemble. Half of what I'm eating should fall into the category of fruits and vegetables. And this vegetable section is a little larger than the fruit section. And on the other half of my plate, that should be represented with grains and protein, the grain section being just a little larger than the protein section. And if you'll notice, dairy doesn't even make the main plate, it's off to the side. So what we're going to be doing for the next 15 minutes or so is working our way through this MyPlate scheme so you can have a better idea about this. But you might just go ahead and think, do you do this, especially with fruits and vegetables? Is about 50% of what you consume each day in either of these categories, hopefully more vegetables than fruit. But yeah, half of what you eat. So let's just look at this first category, fruit. And there's a lot of information on these slides, but you've got them. I am posting, or the PowerPoints are posted by the time you view this. And so you've got it all in the PowerPoint presentation, but I wanted to walk you through it a bit. Now, when it comes to fruit, half of your plate is supposed to be fruit, but I like that the MyPlate guidelines also address, well, how much does that actually mean per day? And most of you in class are probably in this 19 to 30 age group. And you'll notice that it's separated between women and men. If you aren't in the 19 to 30 age group, we've got other age groups identified, and the guidelines can change a bit depending on age and also sex. But, in general, all of you in class, or pretty close to all of you in class, the recommendation is that you consume 2 cups of fruit a day. Okay? And let's go ahead and look more specifically at what counts as a cup. So, common sense might tell us that a cup is a cup is a cup. However, if you look over to the left here in general, 1 cup of fruit, yeah, that equals a cup. 1 cup of fruit juice, yeah, that equals a cup. But when it comes to dried fruit, for example, raisins. Raisins are a dried fruit. 1/2 cup actually counts as a cup. So in most cases, a cup is going to be a cup, except with the dried fruit. So once again, you're trying to get at least 2 cups of fruit a day. And you might start thinking, well, how can I make that happen? And I'm going to give you a bit of a heads up here. It's always going to be best just eat fruit in its natural state. If you switch over and start relying a lot on fruit juice to meet this 2 cup recommendation, what's going to be happening is your intake of sugar will be a lot higher. It may take 7 or 8 oranges being squeezed to create a little over a cup of juice. So when you drink juice, you're getting, it depends on the fruit, but with oranges or with orange juice, it could be 7, 8 oranges worth of sugar when you consume juice. So, and another thing is if you're relying on juice versus just, grabbing an apple, an orange, a kiwi, whatever, you're going to be missing out on another benefit, and that is fiber. So do your best to consume the fruit, limit the fruit juice, and remember, if you go the dried fruit route, 1/2 cup is going to equal a cup. So 2 cups a day on fruit. And let's go ahead and look at vegetables. So vegetables are on that same side of the plate as the fruit, and vegetables actually occupy a little bigger portion. And so when you start looking over here at amounts, how many vegetables are needed daily, what you're seeing is that the recommendation is closer to at least 2.5 cups or 3 cups. And once again, you've got to break down by sex and by age group. And I know based on just, experience with students in the past, what tends to be more so the case is that students will do a pretty good job getting their fruit. But when it comes to vegetables, it seems to be that this area is more difficult. And by the way, corn is not considered a vegetable in this MyPlate scheme. Corn, you could think of corn as a grain. So if you're thinking, well, yeah, I eat a lot of corn, so I get my vegetables, um, that wouldn't be the case. So let's look ahead and see, well, what actually is going to count as 1 cup. And again, it can be a bit tricky with what counts as a cup, but just in general, 1 cup of raw or cooked vegetables, that's going to count as a cup. 1 cup of vegetable juice is going to count as a cup of vegetables. I don't like this idea nearly as much, the idea of doing vegetable juice. With most vegetable juices that you purchase in the grocery store, I'm thinking, for example, of V8. You're going to really increase your intake of sodium. And so staying with vegetables in their natural form um, is going to be a better option. You're going to also lose a lot of fiber if you go with vegetable juice versus the raw or cooked vegetables. I know it's possible that some of you juice on your own at home, and I think, the thing just to ask yourself, are you still, does your intake include everything you juiced? Um, any type of pulp or well, it ends up being fiber, are you still, are you able to keep that within the juice and drink that as well? And I think, juicing at home, for the most part, you can do that. Here's where it changes a bit. Raw leafy greens, we're talking about different types of lettuce, or it could be spinach, kale, um, you know, all of those types of things that we tend to make salads from or mix in our salads, those leafy greens. Well, 2 cups is considered 1 cup. Okay, so that's a little tricky. And I think that if you would run to the kitchen right now and pull out a measuring cup and take a look, you know, get a really good look at, well, how much is a cup? You'll probably realize that you very easily are grabbing 2 cups of raw leafy greens in a salad. So, um, yeah, so that's what counts as 1 cup of vegetables. And now we're over on the other side of the plate in this area that gets referred to as grains in the MyPlate scheme. And what foods are in the grain group? Well, any food that's actually made from a grain, like grains include wheat, rice, oats, cornmeal, barley, or any other cereal grain is a grain product. So what that translates into when it comes to our foods, in this grain category, we're really looking at breads, pasta, oatmeal, breakfast cereals. So those are all examples of grain products. And, on this side of the plate that we're on now, grains and proteins were there. The grains category took up a little bigger section, not a whole lot, but a little bigger section than protein. And, what's important when it comes to selecting grains is to understand that we've got a couple of different types or subgroups with grains, refined and whole. And one of the things that is emphasized with MyPlate is right here, what's highlighted in red, is that at least half of all grains that you're eating should fall into the category of whole grains. We want the bulk of our grain intake to be whole. And whole grains, they contain the entire grain kernel, okay, which means they're higher in fiber. So, and especially because we tend to have problems getting enough fiber, um, ensuring that we're actually consuming mostly whole grains, or at least half whole grains, is really important. Um, Now, maybe to make it a little easier, a lot of our whole grains are actually the browns. So brown bread, brown rice. You can buy whole grain pasta now. Um, and most products that are whole grains really try to advertise that. So, look closely at packaging to determine, is this actually a whole grain or is it a refined grain? And as much as possible, go for the whole grains. So, with regard to refined grains, I've got a pretty good blurb here on what refined grains are. And really, just to kind of break it down, refined grains, they've gone through this process called milling. And the reason for that is when a grain is milled, what you get is food that has a much finer texture. And also, another reason that it's done is milling grains can improve their shelf life. In other words, they last longer if you do this. Um, so those are a couple of reasons why we refine grains. A problem, though, with the refined grains is that when they go through that process of milling, the fiber is removed, the iron's removed, and a lot of the B vitamins. Okay, so what's done next is those grains get enriched, and enrichment is discussed right through here. And with enrichment, what happens is certain B vitamins and iron are added back in, but fiber is not. So if you are opting for white bread, white flour, or products or foods made with white flour, white rice, all the whites, once again, you're just not going to get the same degree of fiber as you would with the whole grains. So when it comes to grains, how much and what and how much per day. And what MyPlate does is they don't talk about cups here. They talk about ounce equivalents. So, we're just getting really accustomed to the idea of cups, how many cups a day of something I'm supposed to eat. Well, with grains, they kind of throw us a curveball here, and they're telling us we're supposed to be eating so many ounces. And between 6 and 8 ounces is considered, kind of meeting that minimum per day. And so, what the heck counts as an ounce? And here are some examples. In general, one slice of bread will count as an ounce. 1 cup of ready-to-eat cereal. Now, I don't know about you guys, but when it comes to ready-to-eat cereal, I have a hunch that most of us eat more than 1 cup. And the same thing right here, 1/2 cup of cooked rice, cooked pasta, or cooked cereal is considered a 1 ounce equivalent. And if you haven't gone to the kitchen yet and pulled out measuring cups, please do so. Stop the video, just do so. Because wow, 1/2 cup of cooked rice, pasta, or cereal is not very much at all. And again, if we're looking at needing to get 6 to 8 ounce equivalents a day, I would say most of us are doing that without problem. Um, the question probably would be is, are we doing the whole grains versus refined grains? So when you look at these ounce equivalents, wow, I think for most of us, we can look at that and go, wow, it's pretty easy to get your minimum carbs or what the recommended minimum is on carbs, or it should be grains. And I said carbohydrates because, you know, typically when we look at this grain category, what fits into this category are what we tend to know and understand as our complex carbohydrates. Okay, so we're going to move along now to protein. This is the other item on this side of the plate. Protein and grains are both there together. So what foods are in the protein group? All foods made from meat, poultry, seafood, beans, peas, eggs, processed soy products, nuts, and seeds. And it says beans and peas are also part of the vegetable group. Okay, so a lot of different sources of protein. Not all are of, I guess, equal quality, and we'll be talking about that more later. But what is considered important from the perspective of just protein in general is we want to be sure that we're consuming lean or low fat choices when it comes to meat and poultry. So, chicken is going to be a leaner choice or a lower fat choice than beef. And then if you just look at a chicken in and of itself, some parts of the chicken are going to be lean or leaner and lower fat than others. For example, white meat on a chicken, the breast meat, has a lower fat content than a leg or a thigh. Legs and thighs are darker meat, higher in fat. The breast meat is white, lower in fat. So, when you're making choices in this area, it is important to pay attention. Um, and this is something that, we'll be talking about protein choices more in a future section, but be focused on going lean and low fat. There are some vegetarian options listed down here, and I will be interested to look at your projects to see um, how many of you actually met your protein requirement. Um, Typically, people in our country don't have a difficult time meeting their protein requirement. Um, Vegetarians even, because there are other sources of protein, and especially, if you do soy or if you supplement somehow. But with vegans, um, that can sometimes be an issue. So I'll be curious to see what happens with your projects here. All right. So how much are you supposed to consume a day, or what's the minimum guideline? And again, these are the general guidelines. Be sure you consume at least this much a day. Later on, I'm actually going to show you a formula um, for how you can calculate how many grams of protein you need in a day based on your sex, your age, your activity level. So we'll get more specific later on, but what this is saying right now is, make sure you consume, depends again on age and sex, but it looks like anywhere between 5 and 6.5 ounce equivalents. And let's go ahead and look and see, well, what the heck does an ounce equivalent translate into? And what counts as an ounce? Well, 1 ounce counts as an ounce. And this always kind of cracks me up because this is where my plate, I think, is a little funky. Some things can be a little harder to understand is when they start telling us what counts as a cup or what counts as an ounce equivalent. There's usually some shifting around, some different numbers here. But 1 ounce of meat, poultry, or fish, and also 1/4 cup of cooked beans counts as an ounce equivalent. And I'm going to go ahead and do that so we make it a little clearer. 1 egg counts as an ounce equivalent. 1 tablespoon of peanut butter, 1/2 ounce of nuts or seeds. And, again, these sources are not all equal in terms of getting high quality protein. These are just some examples for how to measure or how to estimate if you're actually getting um, recommended servings. So let's take a look at some other specific examples, what counts as an ounce. And I think these are pretty good examples. One small lean hamburger, 2 to 3 ounce equivalents. So wow, we're talking about just that basic burger that gets served at, I don't know, McDonald's or Carl's. And to be honest with you, I don't know even if they still serve that really basic burger anymore. But that's, what this is talking about. One small lean hamburger, 2 to 3 ounces. So, wow, if you go back over here and, with that small lean hamburger, it's saying wow, you're about halfway there in terms of meeting your minimum servings per day. So it doesn't take a whole lot to actually get there. One small chicken breast, that's considered half of your minimum. And you can look through this, on your own. You're getting an idea of steak. 1 can of tuna drained, that's considered 3 to 4. So 3 egg whites, that equals 2 1 ounce equivalents. So these are just there to give you maybe a little better idea of, well, how much do I actually need to consume? Okay, so we're moving into our last category here, dairy. And remember, dairy was on the side plate, so it didn't really even make the plate. And dairy is included in the MyPlate scheme because dairy tends to be our best source for this mineral calcium. Okay, and in fact, it says foods made from milk that retain their calcium content are a part of this group. So really, this dairy category, it's there to help us meet our calcium requirement. Now, the recommendation again with the dairy group is it's very similar to the protein group. It's saying most of your dairy choices should be fat-free or low-fat. With dairy, if we consume a lot of dairy, we also are probably going to move into a diet that's higher in total fat and especially saturated fat, the bad fat. So when we make choices in this area, it is, I think, really important to make those fat-free or low-fat choices. My preference in this area is to go low-fat. When we go fat-free, that strips a lot of the flavor out, and there is no fat, but um, fat has this satisfying type of effect. There can be a tendency, if you go fat-free, to actually consume more calories. So I'm more of an advocate to just go reduced fat or low fat in this area. So, and I think this is an important point. Foods made from milk that have little to no calcium, like cream cheese, cream, butter, are not considered a part of this group. Um, Technically, yeah, they're a dairy product, but they don't make the cut here because we're really looking for good calcium sources. If you happen to be vegan and you do not do any dairy, there are so many foods now that are calcium fortified. Soy milks, almond milks, orange juice. So these also, you could think of them as being in this dairy category. So, how much are you supposed to consume in a day? And this is considered the minimum, and it's easy, 3 cups. So, we'll just move along here. Now, cheese as a dairy product. This is where it gets very confusing. This is how cheese gets measured. This actually counts as 1 cup in the dairy category. 1/3 cup of shredded cheese. That counts as 1 cup. So yeah, this is a little confusing. 1/2 cup of ricotta cheese counts as 1 cup. 2 cups of cottage cheese counts as 1 cup. So yeah, and this might be a good time to tell you, no, you don't have to remember all of this stuff. Okay? What I'm actually wanting you to remember is the overall MyPlate scheme. Fruits and vegetables on one side, carbohydrates, or I'm sorry, grains and proteins on one side, dairies off to the side. And then remember the key points with grains. We want to consume whole grains. At least half of the grains we consume, we want them to be whole. With protein, we want to be choosing lean or low fat. With dairy, we want to be choosing fat-free or low fat. So in a nutshell, that's really what I want you to know and understand and remember for a test situation. All of this other information is about clarity. Just beginning to really be able to get a visual of, well, how much is 2 cups, 3 cups? And you have this PowerPoint as a reference, so you could refer back to it. If you are wondering, well, what was it again? How many cups of vegetables am I supposed to have a day? Well, you can refer back to this and it's got it there for you. And again, consider these a minimum. Um, so you won't need to memorize all these numbers. Just know where you can find them when you want to take a look. So that completes this lecture on the MyPlate guidelines, and I hope it's been helpful. Also, hope you're having a really good day, and I'll talk with you soon.